let's jump to the next question, please. So this is a really interesting one for me, given that I'm also working with inclusive recruitment practices myself. So I would love to hear maybe if we can share, some of the most and some of the least inclusive recruitment practices that you've encountered. This could be either as a candidate, as a talent professional, whatever's relevant to your experience. So MK, why don't we start with you?
Okay. I think one of the mistakes I often see is that we start thinking about recruitment when recruitment begins, like when, you know, you're actually just having interviews. And I think it starts way before that. I think we have to think holistically about the whole experience, the whole candidate and employee experience, because first of all, you're not going to attract candidates from underrepresented groups if you don't demonstrate as a company that you're already taking initiatives to create an inclusive workplace, as we were saying earlier. So I think, you know, recruitment doesn't start with the application, it starts before someone even decides to apply. And I think this question of who's making decisions is important to remember as well in recruitment. Like the candidate makes some decisions, but so do hiring managers. So on the candidate side, if the job offer is sent to them, they then need to decide whether to actually take it. And in this case, it can be important to offer benefits that are inclusive, like I was saying earlier, even if and especially if the policies outside of the company are not inclusive. It can be important and become a really competitive company if you offer those policies internally. And then apart from the candidate side, we also have to think about the decision making that happens internally. So the first decision is who to even invite for an interview. I think one inclusive policy that I've seen work really well at other companies is using a form of the Rooney Rule, if you're familiar with that. Basically, it's requiring a certain number of candidates or a certain percentage of candidates from underrepresented backgrounds to be interviewed. And what this does is that you don't have a hiring quota, because in most countries that's illegal, but you have a quota in terms of who's in the candidate pool. And that means that the hiring managers then have a more diverse and representative pool to choose from before making those hiring decisions. And this has been shown to be really effective in a lot of industries. So I think that's a really inclusive, a good practice. I also think when the actual hiring decisions are made, that's another really important point to think about. And this is where I think hiring manager training comes in and is absolutely essential. And I don't think enough companies are doing that. I think I wouldn't say it's one of the least inclusive recruitment practices, because I do think it can work well, but one of the things I'm seeing it challenges with is there's been a lot of new developments and new apps and AI to introduce into recruitment processes to reduce bias in hiring decisions by, for example, removing names or removing identifying data and letting the candidates experience and ability to speak for themselves. I do think that's exciting, and I think it can be used well. But I think we cannot forget that at the end of the day, it's going to be a human being making those decisions about who gets hired in the end. And those human beings, like all of us, have bias. And so if we're going to use tech to reduce the possibility of bias in the recruitment process, we also need to couple that with anti-bias training for the hiring managers, because they're going to be the ones making the final decision. At some point, they're going to see the candidate and talk to the candidate. So we need to also train the managers. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much, MK, for your insights there. I also have to say that the topic of AI in recruitment, AI and inclusivity is such a fascinating one. I think we could host an entirely separate Talking Talent just on this topic. So maybe I won't dive in too deep just yet, but yeah, keep an eye on this space, the Talking Talent community. I think that we'll probably do something like that over the next few months. So Niels, as a talent professional with experience in the different levels of seniority, especially in talent acquisition, what are some insights you can share?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks MK as well for your ideas. I think it's really important to create a diverse pipeline with candidates. On top of that, if you then have a panel that is still the same group of people, the diverse candidates have a disadvantage. So I always ensure that the panel is as diverse as it can be, so not the same group of people. I think in general, like diversity diversity is at this point becoming a little bit of a trend. Everybody thinks, okay, we now need to be diverse, and therefore we should hire diversity. But I think there's one important thing that people forget, and that is diverse teams can only be successful if there's psychological safety. So if the diverse teams or people of minority groups can actually speak up and share their opinion, only then a diverse team is successful, and not otherwise what the same group of people are maybe more successful because the minority groups don't speak up. And I think that is something that we often forget, or some people don't realize. But fixing psychological safety in your company is actually step one for all of these topics, because then you create successful, diverse teams. Then you create an environment where people can actually be themselves. There you create an environment where you can actually have well-being. I think that is the most inclusive practice that you can have in a business. And only then all these initiatives will contribute to, I think, a successful organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Niels. Thank you. Then over to you, Hap.
I think one thing that gets overlooked, and this is absolutely not exclusive to gender expression or sexuality, is sometimes best intentions can still hide biases that we don't know are there. And I think it's interesting that you bring it up, MK, with taking names off of CVs or using different AI, which I will, yeah, absolutely not get into, because I know we could do an entire session on that. But one of the important things to realize, and this is not, again, just from gender or sexuality, but also from race, socioeconomic background, neurodivergence. There are so many things that we're trained to look for that we think we're being really agnostic. So we take the names off, take everything off, go, okay, we're just gonna look at the qualifications. But what that does is erases people who haven't had the same, the top of your, if you're just looking at CVs, the most impressive CVs are often people who've had the most access to education or the most access to mentorship. And it tends to never let people from minorities ever get to that point because they're just constantly filtered out, especially people in the queer community, especially people from a lower, like a different socioeconomic background or from an immigrant background. I think it's super important to not treat all red flags the same, especially when it comes to like gaps in CVs or time spent places. One of the best things I've seen is, and we do it at my current company, I've seen it a couple other places as well, is it's as easy as putting a little blurb at the bottom of your job descriptions that if you do not qualify for this job, or you do not feel like you qualify for this job, but you are convinced that you can do it, or you think you have other skills that apply to this, but just haven't had the exact experience, please apply and tell us that. And even just one, going into the recruitment process with that mentality, but also letting applicants know up front that is a conversation you are open and excited to have, can make a massive impact to making sure you're truly getting a diverse applicants, but then also creating a diverse workplace, because you've created the space for that conversation to happen.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I again couldn't agree more with everything that you just said, Hap. And I think it's actually really important, the question that you raised about how candidates reached, let's say two candidates have reached the same level in their career, but one person had to work so much harder and go through so many more obstacles to get to that same place. Having that context about their identity can definitely tell you a lot more about what they went through and also the kind of attributes and skills and resilience that therefore bringing to a potential role. So I think that's a really, really great way of looking at it. There's definitely different approaches that we can take to these inclusive recruitment practices, and a lot of it is just kind of, you know, trial and error, testing and seeing what works and what doesn't work. Since we are all still in a process of, you know, learning and looking to become better and more inclusive, I think that's a really good message to keep in mind. Well, thank you so much to our three wonderful panelists. It was a really fascinating discussion. As I said, I could happily talk about this for another 2 hours, but we are reaching the end of the